This is the Stephen Mansfield Podcast.
Well, welcome to the Stephen Mansfield Podcast, here where we look at our times through the lens of faith and leadership, character, and history. It's great to have you with me. This podcast is airing on the first day of 2025. I pray and hope that 2025 is a marvelous year for you, one of your best, and we'll certainly do everything we can to contribute to it. In fact, it's for that reason I want to dive into the topic that I have for this podcast. You know that I have spoken many times in this podcast about the sheer pace of change, the sheer deluge of information coming our way, and how we have to work hard to master it before it swallows us. And that's what I want to talk about a little bit today in a slightly different way, because I want to help you as you step into 2025 know how to digest the information you need to digest to master your times, to master your field, to stay abreast. Listen to me. We are living in times when massive change is going to happen. Now, I know a lot of people are thinking that I'm talking about the Trump, election and his inauguration and his administration, and certainly that will bring change. And if he does half of what he says he's going to do, he's going to upend American history. However, I frankly think a lot of people in America and even the rest of the world get sort of preoccupied with Trump and don't pay attention to the rest of what's happening in world history. And so as a result, they are caught surprised. They're caught with their pants down. They're caught unawares. So I want to talk to you in this podcast about how to know your times, know your fields, and be, in essence, ready for what's coming. Are you aware that in 2025, nations we have known our whole lives may go away? Syria might cease to exist. It either might change names or it might subdivide under the pressure of these rebel factions that have basically deposed Assad and taken over the country. They're not going to get along, so what's going to happen? We don't know yet. Will it be an extremist Islamic republic? It will certainly not be some gentle Western democracy. What's going to happen? It's very possible Syria will go away. You know that I've already told you that there is such demographic change taking place in some European countries that because of immigration and other issues, those countries might go away as we know them. In the Netherlands, most of the major cities are now majority Muslim. Now, I love Dutch culture, love the Netherlands, traveled there, dated a Dutch girl when I was in high school. Very much appreciate the legacy of Dutch heritage, Dutch culture, Dutch art, Dutch literature, etc. If you've read The Diary of Anne Frank, for example, you've benefited from a book translated out of Dutch. I could go on and on. And yet, it's quite possible, if something doesn't change, that the Netherlands will become an Islamic republic. That is also the trend in England, as I've said many times. Already, you have Sharia law, the Islamic legal code, required in courts. People who are Muslim who commit crimes are tried in Sharia courts in England. King Charles went on television recently and basically said all religions are equal, which of course is not intellectually honest, but it's a way he's paving the way for a religious change in England. I could go on and on and on. Muslim riots took place in Germany where they were insisting that the entire nation only serve food that was in line with Muslim dietary laws. Think about that. Massive changes are happening in the world. And then we can start talking about what wars might do to Taiwan, to Ukraine. I could go on and on and on. So my point is not to overwhelm you with what you've got to know. My point is to give you a map to how you can get this done. And there are some things I want to recommend to you. Let's start. First of all, I'd like for you to identify your areas of expertise. Now, I know you probably wouldn't use that word of yourself, that you're an expert in certain areas, but all of us have areas where we should specialize, where we should be, let's just use this word behind the scenes, where we should strive to be experts. And there can only be 2 or 3 of those. Even if you're a professor who, let's say, specializes in AI, that's what you lecture on at your university, it's what you write about, it's what you appear in the media about, you should only have 2 or 3 areas of specialization. Mine are the following. I'll give you some sense of it. I specialize in Christian matters. I study Scripture. I pay attention to the recent archaeological discoveries. I pay attention to world Christianity, world trends. Where's their persecution? Where are laws bigoted against Christianity? Where is Christianity thriving? What are the theological trends within Christianity? Obviously, I'm a Christian. I'm a Christian leader. That's one of my main areas of expertise. And I study and I work and I pay attention very carefully. I also consult experts constantly to fast track my growth in knowledge. My second area is Middle East affairs with an eye on the Kurds. You know this. I've written about this. That's my second area. And my third then are religious and certain cultural issues as they play out in Washington, D.C., where I live part of the year and where I consult. And so those 3 areas. Now, there could also be temporary areas of expertise when I'm working on a book. For a while, I lived with Abraham Lincoln and wrote a book called Lincoln's Battle with God. For a while, I lived with George W. Bush. I mean that metaphorically and humorously. And I studied him and lived with him and read his words and wrote about him for about 1.5 years, worked constantly. And I was working towards being an expert on that subject. Then I was an expert for a while on the brewing of beer and the Guinness family and Ireland, and spent a couple of years devoted to that area of knowledge. So sometimes you'll have a temporary area, but my main areas are Christianity, Middle East, and DC happenings on certain subjects. What are yours? What are yours? I want to suggest that you identify what they are. Maybe you run a concrete company in West Texas. Well, you need to know about the steel industry and about the nations that produce concrete and what are the market trends and what's happening in concrete. What are the alterations in the kind of concrete that's being laid? Concrete's a huge area and innovations are happening constantly. If you work in that field, you need to make that an area of your expertise. So how do you do it? We'll talk about that again in a minute. Lawyers and doctors, of course, constant continuing ed and constant understanding of the latest rulings and constant understanding of the latest innovations, etc. You're in a market-driven society. You're in an intellectually driven society. You've got to pay attention to what you're doing. I could go on and on and on. If you run a praline shop on Broadway in Nashville, Tennessee, you've still got to be an expert in certain things. And that's just your profession. How about your interests? Do you have a special needs child? You need to stay abreast of that issue in the law, in medicine, in benefits, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what are the 2 or 3 areas in which you need to be an expert? Again, I know you won't put that on your business card. You can use the word specialty if you want to, but just between us here on this podcast, you want to strive to be an expert. Then you've got to deal, second to that, with the issue of the broader narrative. You've got to know the broader narrative. When something comes up, when something's reported, when something's happening in the world, and not just, by the way, new happenings, but the general narrative of our times involving AI, the general narrative of our times involving the Middle East, the general narrative of our time involving Islam, the general narrative of our times involving economics, et cetera, et cetera. We all need to have that level of general knowledge. And by the way, this podcast, welcome to everybody, of course, but this podcast is a lot about leaders. And those of you who are leaders, you need to understand that a lot of what people are looking for today, no matter your area of leadership, whether you're a pastor or a politician or an educational leader, whatever, people are looking for those who can decode what's happening in the world. Can you explain? Can you help me understand what's going on? What does this mean? They know the breaking news. They know what's happening, but what does it mean? What does Gaza mean? What does Ukraine mean? What's the switch from Biden to Trump mean for Ukraine? And is he going to marry Putin? And what's going on? These are the kind of questions I get asked. So leaders need to be able to explain the world. In fact, it's one of the main things people are looking for leaders to do today. In the great storm of data, what's truth? What's happening? What does it mean? Now, when it comes to this general narrative, I recommend 3 things. I recommend, first of all, that you do set all of your devices and the apps in your devices to give you alerts. Alerts are the assassinations and the bombings and the shootings and the Supreme Court rulings and the things that are breaking, the big storms. Yes, you need to know about those. And in your field, you need to know about innovations. In my field, for example, I need to know about certain Supreme Court rulings. I have my devices set so when the court rules, I will be informed. In fact, I'll get a phone call from somebody that I've asked to call me and promise the mistake in return. I'm bribing people to teach me. And so breaking news. What's the breaking news that you need? When the price of a certain thing goes to a certain height, do you get alerts? There are great apps for that. When a news story breaks, do you get alerts? You need to know that. Now, here's the thing you got to watch. By the way, major media is really only good for breaking news. Be very careful not to think that breaking news is the news. It's the total story you need to know. It's not. But major media, legacy media, ABC, CBS, CNN, they're basically good for breaking news. And you can set your apps and you can be alerted, and that helps you. But don't make the mistake of thinking that breaking news is the total story, because second is you need to know the story. And this is my third. What's the story? Can you tell the story? Challenge yourself to be able to tell the story. Can you tell the basic story of AI? Can you tell the basic story of Gaza? Can you tell the basic story of what's going on with immigration in Europe? Can you tell the basic story of what's happening economically in our times? Can you tell the basic story of what is the crisis in Canada? Why are we hearing so much about Trudeau and why is Trump joking about making it the 51st state? And what's going on? What's the story? Can you tell the story? Very important. And then finally, you need to have in certain areas to a certain degree, the analysis. Analysis is where somebody talks about the story, but talks about where things went wrong, how it got where it is, and what we can expect next. That's analysis. The story is just being able to tell the story, almost values neutral. But analysis is breaking it down a bit, understanding how the way it is, understanding a little bit more of what's happening now, understanding where it might be going. That's analysis. And I do a lot of that in my fields. But what about yours? So essentially, you want to test yourself a bit this year. Stop letting information just flow in one ear and out the other, and ask yourself, can I tell the story? Here's essentially what you have to do. You've got to move data from just data to story. I know 5 facts, but I can't connect them. But the story, if you'll strive for the story, those 5 facts suddenly become part of a narrative. Now you're leading. Now you're understanding. Now you're able to move forward and connect new facts to old facts to evolve the story as it evolves in our times. Now, I've talked before about how to do this, but I'm really insistent that you develop specific strategies. Now, you already know how to set alerts on your devices and use the CBS app or the CNN app or the Fox app or whoever it is you like, and make sure that you've got alerts set. Alerts for breaking news. I've got apps where I can get alerts for Supreme Court news or congressional rulings or on a certain bill, that kind of thing. And yeah, I've got people that I ask to call me or text me when that happens. Sure, you can do the same in your fields. But I strongly recommend that you use news aggregators. I've recommended this many times before, but news aggregators, you don't want to rely on breaking news and major media and legacy media to tell you the story, to help you understand what's really going on in the fields that you need to know and in the general story of our world. So use a news aggregator. I've told you before that I use Flipboard. And Flipboard allows me to set a category: men in our times, great books, Christianity, whatever you might be into, racquetball or a certain congressman or senator. I'll have a certain person in DC who will be a client for a while. I'll put their name in, and then stories begin to be collected for you, aggregated. And you have the ability to say more of this, less of this. So, for example, you can imagine that given what I do with men, I've got masculinity and men and a manhood and men's health and men in the law and all kinds of categories identified. Well, because it's about men, I get a lot of crap, frankly. I get a lot of, how you two can make her happy more ways and all that kind of stuff. Well, I just say I don't want more of that. Literally, it's thumbs down on Flipboard. You go to a place where you do thumbs down. Don't want more of that. Then when I get a really trenchant article about men and literature, there's a really good article recently about why are we losing men to literature. I want more of that. I want more of, an article I recently read. Does American law lean against men? That wasn't the exact title, but that was the subject. I want more of that, right? Men in depression, men in suicide. You understand what I'm saying? And I can fine tune it. Not that I'm trying to silo my understanding, but I don't want sexual stuff. I don't want fashion stuff beyond maybe just a little bit. I don't want to hear about 92 kinds of cologne that will drive her wild. You understand what I'm saying? I'll say no on that. And then I'll say yes on other things. And before long, I've got a really good customized digest that's helping me learn in the fields that I work in, Middle East, DC, etc. Okay. So use Flipboard. Apple News is another one. I don't think it's as good as Flipboard. There might be others I don't know about. And by the way, if you know of some that are great that I don't know about, please write me. I'd love to know about them, love to use them, love to recommend them. Okay. Then also, you want to be reading analysis. And for analysis, I use in my fields, Wall Street Journal, National Review. Now, I read very broadly. I've described it before on this podcast and made some of you nervous. I read the ISIS magazine. I read LGBTQ literature. I read very, very broadly. But for fundamental analysis in my fields, I will use Wall Street Journal. I will use National Review. I'll use some international media. I use Roku televisions, and we have Al Jazeera, and we've got BBC and all kinds of news programs. So you want to have analysis, and this, in my opinion, largely comes from not breaking news television, but discussion television, podcasts, and publications. Yes, I still use paper publications. National Review, Wall Street Journal, they skew conservative, but so do I. So you see what I'm doing. I got breaking news. I've got analysis. I've got general stories. I've got an aggregator app that's helping me stay abreast in what's going on. Gives me the latest breaking stuff on Supreme Court. Sometimes I'll check in on it 3 times a day when Supreme Court's in session. These are the strategies that you have to develop. And then finally, the thing I want to strongly urge for all of us is that we have a smart community around us. I have friends who are experts in the fields I care about. They value my knowledge. I value theirs. We're getting a hamburger and a beer, and we're talking about these things and sharpening each other and compassionately saying, now, did you hear what happened the other day? Have you heard this new term of art that they're using in this area? By the way, Mansfield, you're not a lawyer, so you probably don't know. That's the kind of things that guys will say. They want to make me better, and they don't mind teasing me a little bit that I'm not paying attention to the latest legal jargon. But it makes me better. It makes me smarter. And by the way, I don't mind feeling stupid in a given discussion because I don't know the latest, as long as I learn. I surround myself with smart, gifted people on purpose. I have a lot of friends who don't consider themselves to be brilliant at something, but they're very skilled or fascinating or a lot of fun. But I try to make sure that I people my world with intelligent people who can help me and brief me. And if I get in a crisis, if I get really in trouble, if I've got somebody who's been arrested in some country and I'm trying to get them out, believe me, I've got a network that I activate. They're usually some of the experts and smart people that I've put in my life on purpose and befriended them. And we've got a great friendship struck up, but we also know that we're about certain causes or about mastering knowledge or we're about getting things done. I want to suggest that you do this and that you be intentional about it. You've just got to consider that we are about to see massive changes. And I'm talking about the Trump administration, but not primarily, in our world, in your times. By the way, just the issues related to what's happening with occupations, what's happening with jobs, what your employment is likely to look like. Most of us will not have a single company that we work for in the future. It's all being changed. You want to be abreast. And by the way, you want to know how to work how to put money to work and not just work for money. That's an important area. So get the investment advice you need so you can prosper and be the leader you're meant to be in our times. This issue of understanding our times, getting breaking news, understanding the story, and mastering analysis of the story, as well as having your areas of expertise, will make you effective in your time And by the way, will frankly remove a great deal of stress that might be shaking you a little bit because you don't understand everything you hear in bits and pieces in the news. Master your fields. Master the story. Make sure you're getting analysis. And yeah, it's important. Get that breaking news alert that you need in your fields and in the world. This is going to be essential. All right, it's going to be a great year. I want to do it with you. Let's storm into 2025 together.
Stephen Mansfield is a New York Times best-selling author, a popular speaker, and a frequent faith and culture commentator in international media. His groundbreaking books on faith and society include The Faith of George W. Bush, The Search for God in Guinness, Mansfield's Book of Manly Men, and Lincoln's Battle with God. Learn more at stephenmansfield.tv.